Here I've got my dates, and now I'm going to use the EO month function to get the month end date. What? Why did that happen? Have you ever had the scenario in Excel where the formulas just don't spell? Instead, they display the hash value error. Well, in this video, we're going to find out why that happens and how to fix it. So if you're ready, let's get started. Here we are in Excel and we have our example workbook. We have a column for date, a column for value, and a column for code. We're going to start by finding out what the year is for each of our dates. In cell F4, I type equals year, opening bracket. We have a serial number. Now I can select a single cell, close that bracket and calculate, and it gives us a single year. If I wanted to, I could drag that formula down for each date, and that would calculate the same date for each value. Alternatively, instead of dragging the formula down, we could use something known as scalar lifting, and that's where we perform our calculation over a range of cells, and then it calculates multiple times. When we calculate that from one formula, it now calculates all of these results. We can see that it's a spill range because it has the blue box around the outside. So that means our formula has spilled. That's our year function. Let's do the same with our date function. Equals date, opening bracket. We have year. We know how to use that. Got our year. We then have our month. We can use the month function. We can select that same range. And then let's suggest we want the first of each month. So we'll just provide a 1. We can close that bracket and calculate. And now we get the first day for each month. Now let's come to our EO month function. Equals EO month, which is the end of the month. Our start date is going to be our date. And let's suggest we want 0 months in the future. I'll close that bracket and calculate. Everything looks fine. I could drag that down in the same way. Everything works fine. Now let's see if we can use scalar lifting. When we drag that down and calculate, it now doesn't work. We get the hash value error. Now we could get around this by using our date function in a slightly different way. So we could use our date function. We're going to use month plus 1. That then gives us the next month, and then we could minus 1 day, and that now gives us the end of the month. So the fact that EO month doesn't work, we've still got a workaround, but it's not ideal, and we still don't know why EO month doesn't work. Now let's look at is even. I'll type equals is even, opening bracket. We're going to use our value, close that bracket, calculate, and if we drag that down, it works. But once again, if we try and use scalar lifting, when we calculate that, it displays the hash value error. Now we could get around this. We could use equals if, opening bracket, the mod of our value divided by 2. If that equals 0, then the answer is true, else it's false. Close bracket, calculate. There, if we wanted to use scalar lifting on that, it would work. So why does this complex if and mod calculation work, but is even doesn't? Let's take a look at one more example. We're looking at dec to hex. Type equal dec to hex. This changes a decimal number into a hexadecimal number. We can use our code, close bracket, calculate, and again we get this hash value error. What's wrong with these functions? Why don't they work? Let's go back into a bit of Excel history. Before Excel 2007, there was an additional tool called the Analysis Toolpak, and you could install the Analysis Toolpak and it would give you additional features and functions into Excel. When they released Excel 2007, those Analysis Toolpak functions came into Excel. And here we can see some of the most common Analysis Toolpak functions. We have EO month, we have is even, we have dec to hex, and there are loads more. These are the functions that we had our problem with, and this is the issue, because Analysis Toolpak functions work with multi-value arrays, but not multi-value ranges. So, how do we change a multi-value range into a multi-value array? Let's suggest that we've got a range that contains the numbers 1 to 5 in cells A1 to E1. That is a multi-value range because the range has multiple values. To convert this into an array, we can perform a calculation on the values inside that range. For example, if we used equals A1 colon E1 multiplied by 1, that is a calculation which occurs on each value in that range. That means Excel would calculate 1 multiplied by 1, 2 multiplied by 1, 3 multiplied by 1, and so on. It would perform each of those calculations individually and then return an array. Our original range no longer exists because Excel has performed a calculation on those values. Now, we're not restricted to just multiply by 1. We can use any calculation, and in this scenario we want any calculation that returns the same value. So we can multiply by 1, we can add 0, we can use minus minus at the start, and we can also just use a single plus. That is a rollover from the Lotus 1, 2, 3 days. And when we do any of those things, it will create an array. So even if we start with a range, it will change them into an array. Now let's go and see how this impacts our calculations. I just want to interrupt things here and say that if you want to understand how arrays in Excel really work and really get to grips with some of the techniques that we've used in this video, then you should check out our free course, Modern Excel Formulas. It contains everything you need to understand how Excel's calculation engine really works. And you can find links to the free course in the descriptions box below. For our EO month, we have our range. We want to convert that into an array. For that example, let's use plus 0. When that calculates, it now works. Let's look at is even. We have our numbers. We're going to multiply those by 1. It works. How about dec to hex? Let's use minus minus, and it works. So in all those scenarios with all of those functions, we have managed to convert a range to an array. And all of those functions were functions from the analysis Toolpak. Now let's use this concept inside the group by function. In cell N4, I'll type equals group by, open your bracket, and we want to group by our row fields. Let's suggest we want to group by our date. We then have our values. And finally, we have our function and we want to sum. I'll close that and calculate. That now groups by each individual date. But let's suggest that we want to group by the month end date. Therefore, we're going to edit our first range and use EO month. We want the month end date, 0 months in the future. I'll close the bracket, and when that calculates, we get that same hash value error, and that's because of the EO month function. We know all we need to do is to convert our ranges into arrays. For that, let's use the plus symbol, and when that calculates, it now works correctly. So if you ever have one of these scenarios where your formula should spill but instead returns the hash value error, then it may be because you've used a function which was part of the analysis Toolpak. So try one of these methods to see if that resolves your issue. Now, hash value doesn't just occur in this situation, it occurs in other situations as well. So this isn't the fix to all hash value errors, but it is the fix if you've used a function from the analysis Toolpak that won't spill. If you like this video, then don't forget to subscribe and get notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.